am a painter, painting stories is my profession and my passion. Using research, my own developed style, and hours of work, I strive to tell each story visually in the most interesting and the most beautiful way possible. But as I became published, a problem appeared. I was informed I was not an artist because I illustrated books. I was a parasite on the works of others. I was barred from attending some artist-in-residence programs as they did not accept illustrators. I was refused work at art schools as they did not teach illustration. I was refused artist grants as illustration is not art. What was worse was that my role as storyteller was not considered. The picture book writer whom I co-created with was eligible for funding. I was not. The picture book writer was praised in reviews for their telling of the story. My pictures were seen as mere decorations or just enhancing the words. Günter Kress and Theo van Leeuwen say visual representations are often defined as uncoded replicas of reality or as a means of individual expression. Picture books may therefore be advertised and displayed, for example, at A-Books, Goodreads, and Amazon UK, as if the illustrator did not exist. Unless an illustrator has also written the picture book, their names may not appear in databases of major bookstores. If picture book illustration then is not art or language, then what is it? Motivated by a need to talk about picture book illustration, I wrote the master's thesis Picturing Stories, demonstrating how illustrations in children's picture books can be considered a picturing of the story rather than a picturing of the words. I claim that the child reader, and even the adult, receives information and experience from both the words and images. I argue that because these two separate science systems, words and images, articulate and modify meaning when situated within the same picture book or syntax, then the combined role of words and images can only be understood when both these science systems are recognized as language. In this presentation, I will demonstrate how the opposing semiotic structures of both word and image demand an interdependent relationship and how picture book images can be considered language. To do this, I will draw upon the linguist Ferdinand de Saussure's definition of the linguistic sign, as well as semiologist Charles S. Peirce. I will deploy common conceptualizations from verbal language, such as syntax and grammar, and also parts of speech, such as verbs and modifiers, and discuss how these can be applied to a visual language. Though the term picture language does exist, many scholars, such as Susan K. Langer, claims that pictures do not fulfill the criteria for a language. One of the criteria, says Langer, is the ability to construct a dictionary with units with independent meanings. To demonstrate what might be the independent meanings of words, I will offer definition of the word horse from the Oxford Dictionary of Current English. A large four-legged mammal with a flowing mane and tail used for riding and pulling heavy loads. Not every horse, though, is large, has a flowing mane and tail, and not every horse is used for riding or pulling heavy loads. The dictionary definition then does not articulate the volumes of information embedded in the concept, which is the idea in the mind of the reader. The word, says Ferdinand de Saussure, unites not a thing and a name, but a concept and a sound image. For example, the word horse creates a concept in the mind of the reader and might look like this. The community of speakers, says Saussure, and not the dictionary, contain the information embedded in the concept. The written part of the word, then, is in the dictionary, but the information embedded in the concept is not. According to Peirce, all signs, including words, stand in a triad relationship. A pictorial sign for horse might look like this. The pictorial sign represents its object and creates a concept in the mind of the viewer. The visual sign for a horse, the linguistic sign for a horse, and the concept of a horse are three different sign systems. The image may be too specific for general use, the word being general lacks volumes of information, and the concept cannot be recorded or materialized. None of these sign systems, then, can be considered a complete form of human communication, independent of the other. Millions of words in a language, says Saussure, can be made from a limited number of letters in an alphabet. Similarly, billions of pictures can be made from colors and forms. Though there are an infinite number of forms and colors in the world, it is possible to break these down into, for example, 6 or 100 forms, and for example, 12 or 3 colors. Just as letters can be positioned in an alphabet, pitches can be positioned on a music scale, and colors can be positioned within a natural color circle system. Red, for example, can only be positioned between orange and violet, or yellow between green and orange to create harmony. To rearrange these colors would create an increase in contrast and a decrease in harmony. The most reducible parts of a verbal language, claims Saussure, become meaningless when separate from each other. A succession of sounds is only linguistic if it supports an idea. This is also true of colors and form. In addition to representing ideas, colors and forms can express harmonies or contrasts within a pictorial composition, as music can express harmonies or contrasts within a musical composition. Verbal language, says Saussure, has two characteristics of equal importance. The first characteristic is that the bond between the concept and the sound image is arbitrary, meaning the word has no resemblance whatsoever to the object or idea it represents. The second characteristic is that auditory words unfold in time and written words over a measurable span. Picture language, on the other hand, has a non-arbitrary natural bond and a layered structure to be read simultaneously. Both language systems then contain the two primordial characteristics, but in opposing ways. It is the opposing semiotic structure of word and image that make these two forms of human communication inseparable. How can I make such a claim? That word and image are inseparable? Before the advent of written language, the non-arbitrary part of verbal language, intonation, facial expression, pointing to objects, and visual gesture, were inseparable from the individual speaking the word. Hieroglyphics, drawing, photos, theater, comics, fonts of various designs, films, Snapchats, Picturebooks, pictures, emojis, and much, much more have since shared the journey of verbal language. Even before photos were added to newspapers, the Paris morgue, says Vanessa R. Schwartz, could have up to 150,000 visitors each day. The visitors came to view the dead who had been sensationally detailed by the printed word. Visual narratives in medieval churches were made for mostly an illiterate society, yet films portraying each successful novel are made for a literate society. Many images, such as emojis, symbols, and pictograms, articulate in purely visual terms, meaning they do not illustrate the word for bends in roads, train stations, and toilets, but represent these terms directly, as do barometers, thermometers, and sundials. Furthermore, pictures can be considered representations of visual thinking, just as written and spoken language can be considered representations of verbal thinking. Comparatively, the Picturebook picture is not dependent on Picturebook words to be understood. Instead, it is the Picturebook story that is dependent on both words and images. By separating the task of story creating from the task of storytelling, the illustrator and the writer share the storytelling role in equally valuable ways. To demonstrate further how images might express narrative, I would like to propose as to what a pictorial verb might look like. This is a fine art etching by David Blackwood. In this eerie picture, we are given a point of view below the sea, in what will soon be the watery grave for the people in this boat. The whale and the part of the iceberg create triangular shapes that point in the direction of this watery grave. The tiny fire points upwards in the opposite downward direction of the huge whale, describing two separate yet crucial to the story directions. This is a picture book illustration by Fergus Hall from one of my favorite picture books, Groundsel. In Hall's picture, we share the point of view of Groundsel losing Jack Frost as he disappears up the chimney. The curving chimney is pointing to the sky, becoming a pictorial map of Jack's escape route. In Hall's image, a tiny but important to the story key points downward in the opposite direction to Jack's upward triangular escape route. In both narrative pictures, one considered fine art and the other an illustration, a turning point or hinged moment is pictured using similar grammar. Triangular and pointing shapes expressing movement and direction become the pictorial verbs of these compositions. Pictures on picture book covers often express something general about the whole story, as does the verbal title. This contrasts the words and images inside the book that are both arranged discursively with a beginning, middle, and end. The title, The Paint Box, named this part of the image. Informing the reader that this is the paint box. The image specifies what kind of paint box, like a pictorial adjective, offering the volumes of information that is otherwise missing in the words. Michel Foucault might have called this composite text image a calligram, bringing a text and a shape as close together as possible. The composition is the grammar of the picture, allowing the comparison and positioning of elements within a field. The paint box's importance is expressed by being placed in the foreground. Its unique identity exists only within the syntax of this particular picture and story. Though Marietta is not mentioned in the title, her importance is understood as the owner of the paint box. Also, the board she is painting on resembles a board she is pictured on, like a game where she and her paint box are in the painting being painted. While Marietta ignores her viewers, the paint box engages by displaying its contents. Though the vignette on the back of the book cover is tiny, its importance is articulated by sharing the identity of the paint box. This vignette then functions as a pictorial pronoun. Another essential part of narrative is the representation of time. In his criticism of the representation of time in narrative pictures, Werner Wolf asks whether the word narrative should be reserved for literary text alone. Through the centuries, though, artists have found multiple methods of representing time. Franz Wyckoff offers three methods: polyscenic, monoscenic, and continuous. In the cave art from Lascaux, made 20,000 years ago, and in Anna Fisker's picture book, Hello World, more than one moment is simultaneously represented in a polyscenic format. In reality, events do not happen all at once, but both simultaneously and successively. The limitation of pictures representing time only simultaneously can be compared to the limitations of words, which by way of grammar represent time only discursively. In monoscenic format, the main elements of a story are concentrated into one frame scene, often depicting a turning point within the story, leaving the reader to fill in what happens before and after. In Hilde Kramer's monoscenic book cover for The Cuckoo, she offers an eye-to-eye point of view after the chick has hatched and before it flies. In Rembrandt's monoscenic painting The Return of the Prodigal Son, the moment of forgiveness is pictured after the destitute son has returned and before the father arranges a feast. Such biblical narratives were once considered the highest form of Western painting. Parallel to that tradition, though, religious stories portraying time in a continuous format decorated the walls of Christian churches. These images, says Marilyn A. Lavin, remained a major medium of public communication for over 1,000 years. Fiske's Here I Come is a variation of continuous format where time is partitioned into segments of colored shapes. In the 70-meter-long continuous Bayeux tapestry from 1066, both words and pictures can be read discursively like a chain of events unfolding in time. Though discursive images have an enormous presence in the history of art history books such as Ernst Gombrich's famous The Story of Art display continuous format art, such as the Bayeux tapestry, as rectangular shapes, robbing these images of their representations of time. The Bayeux tapestry does not just represent time in continuous format. Hundreds of birds and animals, including 9 Aesop fables, fill the upper and lower borders. These monosynic fables contrast the continuous format of the tapestry's main narrative. The fables, claimed Suzanne Lewis, are aligned with the characters and events in the central narrative, causing intertextual connections. The composition of the Fox and the Raven from the Bayeux Tapestry, 1066, and from a modern picture book by Ginger Caprick have not changed much in almost 1,000 years. To further demonstrate how both the meanings of words and images may shift, I will offer as one final example the Aesop's fable, The Wolf and the Dog. A starving wolf meets a well-fed dog. The wolf asks the dog how he gets enough to eat. The dog invites the wolf to his master's house without letting on what he must do to be a dog. When the wolf learns that the festering sore on the dog's neck is from his master's chain, he tells the dog that he would rather remain hungry and free. In this fable, the wolf and the dog are opposing metaphors for freedom and independence, for individuals without choices, for the underdog, and captivity. This is also true in Ginger Caprick's picturing of the fable. The viewer is given a point of view that looks down more on the dog than on the wolf. The dog, with his tail tucked between his legs, his open sore and hanging ears, articulates subservience and sadness, while his soft plump forms articulate being well fed. The wild wolf, on the other hand, is thin yet graceful. His tail and his knife-like pointed head are held high, articulating alertness, elegance, and freedom, while being placed above the dog, expressing superiority. The right-hand side of the page has a building and a snowman representing the world of people. The dog is walking slightly ahead of the wolf, compositionally returning to that world. On the left-hand side of the picture, there are trees, birds, and bushes. The wolf has not yet, within the composition, left this side of the page that represents the natural world. Which way will these animals go? Towards freedom and starvation, or food and domesticity? The wolf, seeing only half truth, the well-fed part of the dog, is willing to give up his identity to be like the dog. The dog secretly wishes to be free like the wolf, but not starving. This suggested shift of identities is expressed visually as one half of the dog overlaps the one half of the wolf. The landscape's white rectangular form frames the two animals, silhouetting them into seemingly one entity. The wolf and dog are then nested together, and for one brief moment, their identities seem to merge. In conclusion, illustrations such as these in children's picture books can be seen as a picturing of the story rather than a picturing of the words. Because word and images articulate and modify meaning when situated within the same picture book or syntax, then the role of images can only be understood when recognized as language. As all language can be structured as information and as art, then both the verbal language and the picture language can be recognized as art and information. Picture book pictures, then, containing both communicative and aesthetical properties, can be compared with narrative pictures conventionally considered fine art. In turn, fine art has a long tradition of visual storytelling. The importance of this recognition is also manifested in the picture book's intended audience, the child reader. Though an adult may be just reading the picture book words, the child is listening to the words and reading the picture book pictures. The visual narrative in a picture book, then, may just be a child's introduction to visual art and visual language. Thank you.